Welcome to this episode of Outside Ourselves. Today, my guest is pastor and writer Matt Popovits. We are talking about Matt's new book, which is out in the middle of next month. The book is entitled Junk Drawer Jesus. And I'm telling you, I think that this book is really a must-have for everyone, no matter your theological background or your level of study theologically, because really what Matt is doing in this book is walking readers through a lot of the theological clutter we often hold on to that we don't need because it doesn't serve us and because it's not true. He's trying to unpack those common theological misunderstandings that we are all very prone to hold tight to our chest, that we don't want to clean out. And in turn, he's giving us the good news of Christ crucified, which, as he will state in this interview, is really the central thing we need to keep in that drawer. This is a great conversation. I always love talking to Matt. He's one of my favorite preachers to listen to. He is so good at making this information about the Bible, about Jesus, really accessible to everyone. And so, like I said, I think that this is a book you're going to want to have not only for yourself, but for someone who's close to you, who wants to and needs to return to the fundamentals of the Christian faith. With that, here is our interview. Matt, thanks for being here today in person. You drove up from Houston to be here, so thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so excited to talk to you about your new book, which, if you're watching on YouTube, we have here, Junk Drawer Jesus.
Yeah.
I have loved what I've read so far. It's so good. I think it's super accessible and going to be really helpful for people. So before we dive into the book, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, all of that.
I am a pastor and now an author, apparently, I guess.
Published author?
That's right. And host a podcast of my own called Make It Simple. But more than anything, I'm a husband and a dad. So I am married to my high school sweetheart, Lisa.
Amazing.
We've been married for 22 years, believe it or not. And we have two incredible kids, Ava, who is a sophomore at Texas A&M, and Jack, who is entering the 4th grade.
That is awesome.
So they keep me really busy, keep me on my toes, keep me honest in all things, but especially in my preaching and teaching.
Yeah.
And so more than anything, I'm husband and dad.
That's great. Well, tell me a little bit about kind of the why behind this book. How did it formulate? It's such an I think unique metaphor or analogy, and a really helpful one. So tell me kind of how you decided that this is what you wanted to write about.
Well, this book is born out of hundreds of conversations over the years in pastoral ministry, and also just in my personal life with friends, parishioners who are searching for an understanding of the Christian faith that is more satisfying than a list of to-dos or a series of spiritual expectations. People who are exhausted by the spiritual experience that they're having, or just confused and frustrated by it as the world around them changes, and as they feel a kind of a mounting spiritual pressure upon their shoulders that comes not just from church, but from social media. It comes from family and friends that are well-intentioned. We have a lot of spiritual influences outside of the pulpit that we may sit under.
Yeah.
If we go to church, we have a lot of spiritual influences, and all of them add a bit of spiritual pressure and theological confusion. And whether we know it or not, we pick all these things up, and they become part of a spiritual and religious framework. And that framework oftentimes becomes exhausting or confusing. And I know a lot of people who are just trying to set all of it aside. And what they'll say is, that they're walking away from Christianity, or they are deconstructing their Christian faith. But really, when you have conversations and you wrestle with what is it that's frustrating them, what is it that's exhausting them, it's not the gospel, because the gospel doesn't do that.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it is all of this other stuff. it's this collection of other theological assumptions that we pick up and we carry or that get placed upon us. And so this book is really a response to all those conversations with my confused or exhausted friends and family and parishioners, where we examine those theological, spiritual assumptions that we carry that are in fact weighing us down or muddying the waters for us. And we set those aside rather than set the faith aside. We set those things aside. And over in each chapter, we just get back to the basics, the simplicity and the profundity of grace, grace alone.
Yeah. You said that we are picking up these theological assumptions, misconceptions, and really to go along with the title, it's theological clutter that doesn't need to be there. Can you talk a little bit more about the metaphor or the analogy behind using a junk drawer and why you found that really helpful and insightful for people and for yourself?
Well, it's because a junk drawer is something everybody has. Even the cleanest, the neatest person among us has a spot where they put all the other stuff that they don't know what to do with. They have that closet, they have that drawer. So everybody has a junk drawer. So it's a really understandable and relatable analogy. And we all have theological junk drawers too. We have a random collection of theological half-truths, spiritual ideas that we pick up along the way that at one point maybe we thought were insightful or helpful, useful for us. And they're still precious enough to us that we don't want to throw them away just yet, but we don't really know what to do with them. And so we hold on to them. And so the idea of the book is for us to open up that metaphorical junk drawer and just take a look at all the things that we've gathered over the years. And again, they come from a number of resources, a number of sources. So a lot of it comes from online. We follow people that are inspirational or encouraging. And whether we know it or not, it has a spiritual bent to it. It's all about us trying to, in some way, shape, or form, sanctify ourselves, make ourselves better, right? It's about trying to be righteous, be good enough, at the very least for ourselves, if not for everybody else. It's about actualizing, stepping into the fullness of our human existence, right? It's all that. That's all spiritual stuff. That's all religious stuff, even though it would never claim that title. And we screenshot these things, we memorize these things, and then we carry these things. And so in the book, we're just taking a look at, we're putting a label on some of these things, and we're kind of deconstructing those things. So for example, one of the things that people will often say is, as they talk about God, is that God just wants me to be happy.
Yeah.
And that's one of the spiritual assumptions many people carry with them. But it in reality is, number one, it's not true, according to the scriptures. Does God care about your happiness? Certainly. But there's something deeper that the gospel gets at, which is something like peace. There's joy, which is deeper. There's also holiness. There's a place to talk about holiness. These are deeper things that God cares about that can result in the emotions of happiness, right? Serenity, right? But God is after something deeper than just your surface level happiness. And if what you think, if you walk around thinking that, well, God wants me to be happy, I'm not happy, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with God? That's the pressure that starts to mount, right? And so we take that, we pull that out of the drawer. The analogy for that is a party hat. Right?
Yeah.
Like an old party hat left over from some birthday party you got dragged to, right?
Yeah.
It's got that string that goes underneath the chin. It makes your hair look awful. You got that stuffed in the drawer. We pull that out and we examine the notion of does God want you to be happy? Is that one of the foundational promises, or is there something better, something deeper that the gospel actually delivers to us, that the true gospel delivers to us? So we pull each one of those things out and look at them. Yeah,
I want to get to some more of these misconceptions because I think they are super helpful. But you mentioned you've mentioned the word deconstruction a few times, and I know that word for a lot of people there's so many different meanings. For some people, it has a lot of baggage. Can you tell us kind of what you mean by that word and why you think it's an important thing to mention in a book like this?
I think deconstruction, the way I understand it, is a good thing, insofar as, so long as your intention is to rediscover or reconstruct the true thing, the real thing. I think sometimes people enter into what they'll call a season of deconstruction with no intention of rediscovering or reconstructing anything. What all they're doing is it's just demo day all the time to the things that they've believed and the truths that they've carried with them. And but I think that there is a place and it's a healthy process of analyzing, of taking a thoughtful look at all the assumptions you carry with you.
Yeah.
And if your goal is to get to the truth, if your goal is to get to the essential message of the Christian faith, right? If you're a Christian who's trying to deconstruct, then I think deconstruction, or just you call it reassessing, call it taking an inventory of your own theology, is a good thing, is a healthy thing, so long as the goal is to get to and rest in and enjoy the true thing. And I know there's a lot of people who are in that stage of life. You know, you reach a point in life where you say to yourself, well, my faith has to matter to me. It should matter to me. It does matter to me. But boy, I feel like there's a whole lot of extra stuff that is just piled into this faith category that I just don't know if it's helpful for me. I don't know if it rings true for me. Like it feels like it makes my life more confusing or burdensome or just frustrating. I want to see if I need to keep this stuff. I think that's a healthy process.
Yeah.
And I think, like, for example, like when you look at those Christian scriptures, when you look at the New Testament, Paul, for example, is writing letters to churches like the church in Galatia, and he is encouraging them to open up an ever-expanding junk drawer and go, look at this stuff, guys. You are collecting some spiritual ideas, some theological half-truths that are going to corrupt your peace and cloud the gospel. Pull open that drawer and throw some of these things away. People are coming to you and saying to you, like, yeah, you really need to obey the whole law, right? And that same message of just be better, try harder, be a little more successful in life, and your spirituality will fall into place. That message is still being, preached, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so deconstruction is just about, again, opening up that drawer and going, do I need to keep this? Yeah. And I think that's a healthy process.
Yeah. And in that sense, you wouldn't say that this is a uniquely modern problem. I mean, if Paul's been wrote about it, and you think people have been doing this since the beginning?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think anyone who's taking at all a thoughtful and engaged approach to their own faith is honestly should be doing a constant assessment of what they believe, and a kind of a perpetual deconstruction. Another way to think of deconstruction is, rather than deconstruction, you could also talk about curation. Yeah. Like, and that's kind of the last chapter of the book. As you try to equip people to move forward, the title of that chapter is Continued Curation. There is a constant curating of what you're keeping in your theology, coupled with a constant awareness of what you're tempted to reach out for and hold on to, and ask yourself, is what I'm choosing to believe now, what I'm holding on to now is true, what I'm adding to my worldview, is this in alignment with what I know to be true in the message of Jesus Christ? Is this competing with it? Is it clouding with it? There's a constant curation that needs to take place. Yeah. That gets to take place. Yeah. And so I think this is something that should go on in the life of every follower of Jesus, or someone who's curious about the kind of the way of Jesus, the message of Jesus. And I also think it's something that thoughtful people of faith have been doing since the very beginning.
Yeah. Okay. This is making me think. I know kind of two types of people. I am one of these types. Yeah. There's the type of person who never cleans out their junk drawer. Yeah. Who would really argue strongly, well, I need to keep this because I might need it someday. Yeah. And then maybe that point comes true, like they find I feel like there's a bunch of social media reels about this where like the dad finds like this perfect piece of wood that he needs for some random project, and he's like, see, I should have kept it. Sure. Yeah. So there's that type of person. Then there's another type of person who's constantly cleaning, curating, and maybe even gets wrapped up in that process in and of itself, and finds worth and value in that. What would you say to both of those people? I guess that's maybe two questions, but what would you say to the person who's not willing to open the drawer because they think they need something and they've even seen that come true? And what would you say to the person who's all of a sudden very wrapped up in, yes, I've got to curate and I've got to clean, and finding their value in that?
Yeah. So I think the most powerful pastoral question that anyone can ask is, and this will sound just like eye-rollingly simple, but the most profound pastoral question anybody can ask is, why? So what I'd say to both is why. So for the person who is a spiritual hoarder, who is like, I have to keep all the spiritual things and add them to my collection, my question would be, why do you feel the need to do that? And I would dig into a conversation with them, or maybe they say to me, well, I just I don't want to be caught not having the right truth, right, or not believing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so then we'd go into a conversation of saying, well. How many right things are there that we need to hold on to, right? Because as Christians, what we would say is the one right thing, the one needful thing for us to believe or to depend upon is Christ.
Yeah.
And the work that He's completed for us.
Yeah.
Everything else is secondary, and so we talk about the necessity and the supremacy of the finished work of Jesus, and how that gives us the freedom to not have to hoard things spiritually. We get to let go. Now, what I also say to this person is, look, if you want to hold on to a bunch of stuff, like, I'm not gonna. You're still saved by grace, man.
Yeah.
You want to hold on to a bunch of stuff for sentimental reasons, or even some theological reasons that I might disagree. Fine. But what I want to do is I want to give you the freedom to know you can let go of all these other things.
Yeah.
Because the one thing has been given to you, the person and work of Jesus. Now, for the other person who is kind of religiously, zealously trying to clean out their spiritual life and stay spiritually perfect, what I would say, first thing I would say is, well, why do you feel the need to do that? Well, because I don't want to corrupt. I don't want to confuse. I don't want to cloud the truth in my life.
Right.
So I got to keep it clean. I got to Marie Kondo this thing all the time. And I would say, well, let's talk about what it is. I agree that we want to. I wrote this whole book about not clouding the message of the gospel. I get that. I get that desire. But let's remind ourselves of what we actually believe about the gospel. That the gospel is a gift. The gospel is the message of Christ crucified and risen for us, given to us, that makes us right now righteous and pure. Right? Does that sound like something we have to protect?
Yeah.
Does that sound like something we have to? We are actually set free in that message to simply enjoy that thing. We don't have to worry about protecting that thing. I appreciate your desire to religiously curate your life and keep it pure. But the truth is, we can't keep ourselves spiritually, theologically pure enough. We can't, and we also don't have to.
Yeah.
Right. We get to just enjoy the message of who Jesus is and what He's done for us. And I would actually invite that person to let their collection maybe even kind of just gather for the sake of like look, we're going to do some exposure therapy to you can open yourself up to some other ideas here, and you can listen to some podcasts that are outside of your tribe. Maybe you can read a couple books that might challenge your worldview, and let's give the gospel an opportunity to prove that it's unthreatened by all these things, right?
That's amazing.
Right? So I'd probably say, you know what? Let's just let it get dirty for a little bit, and let's trust that because the one thing that's most important is inside that drawer. Let's trust that it's going to take up the most space, and it's going to win the day. Yeah, so,
I love that image of like a dirty drawer and the gospel just shining through no matter what. That's right. So helpful. Whether there's too much clutter or or we're afraid there's going to be too much clutter.
It's never going to be empty, right? Because like spiritual life is like a dynamic thing, right? It's so I grew up in the country, in the middle of Michigan, and we would always go out like playing in the fields, playing in the woods and stuff. And it was the 80s. It was wild. They would just open the door and we'd run out. And then like 9 hours later, we'd come back and be like, we found a homeless person. like what? Yeah, he gave us $1. It was crazy. So like crazy things would happen, right? So like we would go wandering in the fields, and I was always, this is going somewhere. I would always wear like these sweatpants as a kid, right? So I was always wearing sweatpants.
Like a tracksuit?
No. Like not a tracksuit, but like I don't know. They're like a cotton.
Okay,
like
cotton,
sweatpants.
comfy sweatpants. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and I would come back at the end of the day after having run through the fields, and there would be all these burrs just kind of all over me. And there'd be like almost impossible to pick out. They'd be in my shoelaces. They'd be all over my pants because I've run through the fields waist high, and all this stuff sticks to me, and I bring it home with me, right?
Yeah.
That's another analogy for what it is to live for our spiritual lives.
Yeah.
We are running through the world each and every day. You don't have the option not to. You're wading through human existence, and there's all this stuff that sticks to you.
Yeah.
The messages that you surround yourself with, the books that you read, the podcasts you listen to, the social media you scroll through, the algorithm, all of it. Your well-intentioned friend who texts you some truism about how the world works and how it's all going to work out, okay, whatever. Like all that stuff is all around you, and it sticks to you. And you come home at the end of the day and maybe you don't even notice it, but there's all these burrs like all over your legs and on your shoelaces, and you carry them with you.
Yeah.
And so it takes intention to like notice them and go, I need to remove some of these, right? But it's not an option as to whether or not it's going to happen. It is going to happen. You go through life and you pick up all this spiritual stuff. And then what we get to do, what we're invited to do, we have the freedom to do because we already belong to God the Father's family through the work of Jesus Christ, is we get to, with a spirit of freedom and with great peace in our hearts, we get to look at all the stuff that sticks to us and go, oh, well, I don't need this.
Yeah.
And pull that off and throw it to the floor. And this was well-intentioned, but I don't really need that. Pull that off and throw it to the floor. And this is kind of strange. I don't know where I picked up that, but pull that off and throw it to the floor. And but we don't have the option not to experience that.
Yeah.
Because spiritual life is dynamic. We're running through this world, and all this stuff sticks to us, and it's either going to accumulate and you're just going to kind of navigate it, or you're going to curate it and kind of look at it, examine it, and
pick it off.
And move it.
And it could change. It's not going to change your standing.
Not at all.
But it could change I think you used the word enjoyment.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Who God is and what He's done for you. And I think that's really helpful.
That's right.
Because the minute we start talking about this stuff as a have to, or even, I don't think I think most people probably don't talk about it that way up front, but it's framed as an essential part of getting God to think of you in a certain way.
That's right.
And that's dangerous.
Oh yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah. I mean, it's a get to.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to have a clean spiritual junk drawer. I mean, you don't have to. You get to. You can. You can begin to curate those things with great freedom.
Yeah.
Once you have as you enjoy the gospel, right? Like you have great freedom. But it's not a way to gauge our salvation at all. It's not a way to gauge, how much we've grasped, the love of God.
Right.
Not at all. It's often in Christian circles, we will look for gauges of the level of the level of sanctification that we're experiencing, or how much we really, really love Jesus, right? People are constantly looking for gauges. This is not that.
Yeah.
This is something done in freedom, right? I liked the way you said it, Kelsi, is that it does not affect our standing at all. This is an extension of a freedom that comes from understanding our standing with God.
Yeah.
Right? That we get to look at our lives with great clarity at times and go, oh, this is not the gospel. That is not the gospel. Yet I'm carrying it in my spiritual framework, and it's not helping. I'm going to let it go.
Yeah.
I'm going to let it go. I get to. it's the second kind of righteousness, right? So the first kind of righteousness being this passive, alien righteousness, this goodness that I have, that I possess because it's Christ's goodness that's been wrapped around me, and now the Father looks at me wearing Christ's clothing of goodness, and I can't change. Like, he just sees me as good, because he sees me through the lens of Christ, right? And now there's this second kind of righteousness where I try to live in that freedom and enjoy that coat that's been wrapped around me, and go, I am right with God the Father through Jesus Christ. And let me just joyfully, freely look at the stuff that doesn't belong in this life that I'm called to live. It isn't helpful. It doesn't have to be here. And look at it and know that I have the freedom to set it aside.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, let's talk a little bit about I want to get into some of the misconceptions that you are kind of unpacking for people.
Yeah.
The first 2 chapters, you're really talking about measurement.
Yeah.
In 2 different ways.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about those ways of measurement that you're introducing and why you felt like it was important to make a distinction between the 2?
Yeah. So I talk about 2 different types of things. There's one way in which we try to measure our performance as people, and whether or not we're, I guess you'd say, like in an evangelical circle, like whether or not we're saved.
Yeah.
Right. And there's another form of measurement that we then engage in, which is how saved are we, right? Which is how holy have I become. So in chapter 1, we talk about the scale. And the scale being this idea that many people have of, so long as my good things that I've done outweigh the bad things, then I'm good with God. And it sounds like such a simple idea that certainly most people don't think that way anymore.
Right.
But the truth is, virtually everybody that you'll encounter, even people of faith, even Christians, they are operating according to this kind of cosmic scale all the time.
Right.
It's part of how we get ourselves to sleep at night when we feel really guilty.
Yeah.
Like, I did something terrible today, but you know what? I meant well, and I also did this good thing, and I also texted my friend who's in the hospital. So, like, I'm not a bad person. We are constantly trying to, like, balance the scales all the time. And that's a reflection of a spiritual idea that virtually all of us hold to some degree, that says, so long as my good outweighs my bad, then I'm good, right? And so, and people see that as a pathway to, or a connection to the divine in some way, shape, or form. They measure their relationship with God. Well, so long as my good outweighs my bad, then I'm good with God. I'm good with myself, and I'm good with God. And so in the first chapter, we take apart that idea and say, really, like, how good is good enough?
Yeah.
Like, can you do it? Can we do it? And of course we can't, right? Which is the best news in the world. The best news in the world is that I can't put enough good on the scale, right? Because it gets me off the hook from having to, right? Like, I'm just not in that game. I don't have to be in that game. Now, should I be a good person? Sure. Can I be a perfectly good person? No.
Yeah.
Right? And so it gets me out of that game altogether. And so there must be another way. There must be another way. There must be a way to be good with God that is apart from my own goodness. And so we remind everyone of this kind of passive righteousness, this gift of grace, this gift of a right standing versus an earned right standing. And then in the second chapter, what we find in the junk drawer is a ruler. Like the old wooden kind of ruler with the metal edge on it that we all had in elementary school. They're good. They're not only good for like drawing things and measuring things, but they're good as a weapon, right? Like when you're like a kid, like if you grew up in a Catholic school, like my wife did, like the nuns would come around and actually wrap your knuckles with the ruler, right? So the ruler represents our desire to measure our progress.
Okay.
And so another spiritual assumption that many people carry with them is that once I have a relationship with God, that I can measure how close or how far I am from Him based on my understanding of theological truths or my adherence to theological expectations. We also introduced the idea of a mountain, like measuring your way up a mountain. So the idea being that a relationship, so to speak, with God gets you on the mountain, but then you have to climb up to the top of it and get closer to Him. And you should be looking at your theological acumen or your how good of a person you are, how good of a neighbor you are, how good of a parent you are, or just how earnestly you feel certain things in your own heart to measure, how close you are to God, right? How far you are up the mountain. And so we talk about that. Like, is that really a thing? Like, that we get closer to God based on our own efforts, and we can somehow look at our own life and go, well, I'm really close to God. I'm far from God right now. And of course, what we discover is, well, that's just not how God operates at all.
Yeah.
God does not have us ascend a mountain, right, and then measure our progress. He descends the mountain to us, right? And then that's what the incarnation is. God comes down the mountain, so to speak,
right,
and meets us where we are.
Yeah.
Right. Or like I think of, and this isn't in the book, but it probably should be. So like,
it'll be on this podcast.
Right. So like when Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration with Peter, James, and John, and they see him in all of his glory, right? And they're just stunned. Stunned, not only stunned, but scared. And they start to, it says they fall, the text says they fall to the ground, right? And they are so stunned and scared by the unfiltered glory of Jesus that they fall to the ground in fear.
Yeah.
And then what it says is that Jesus bends down and he touches them. He puts his hand on all three of them, one by one. So Jesus, who's just revealed the fullness of his glory, bends down to the ground, on his knees, assumably, we can assume. And he touches each one of them and says, do not fear. Let's get up and go home. That, in its own way, is the gospel.
Yeah.
The fullness of God, the glory of God descending to us who are prone on the ground, getting dirty, getting knees dirty, getting on the ground with us, putting a hand on us and saying, do not fear.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Right.
We don't climb up to the glory. The goodness, the glory, the grace, the mercy, the awesomeness of God descends to us in our weakness, in our fear, and lays a hand on us.
Yeah.
We don't get closer to God. God gets close to us, and he gets close to us in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So that's what we talk about in the first two chapters. Number one, measuring our goodness as a way of getting closer to God, and then measuring our progress and our proximity and our relationship to God.
And I mean, you talk, obviously, these two chapters are really about how that's not how God sees us. You just unpack that for us. But you also talk a little bit about what that type of measuring, whether it's with the ruler or the scale, does to our relationships with our neighbor. Can you talk a little bit about that for people? Because I think that's, I don't know, something that maybe isn't like the first thing that's brought up when we have these conversations about perfectionism or sanctification. But for me, that's I think what's really hit home is when I realize, oh, this problem and this, like, my need to measure is not only a misunderstanding of who God is for me, but it's really messing with how I view others or how I treat others.
That's right. So, and it's a bit philosophical, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bit deep, but it's true that if I am trying to climb, closer to the divine, or you take God out of it, I'm trying to perform and prove and perfect in my life and climb towards my functional God, which is perfection, right?
Right.
If I'm trying to climb and I'm trying to measure, then the people around me that I'm actually living with and living out these vocations with, they become a means to an end.
Yeah.
They become someone that I'm using for my own self-edification and my own glory, essentially. And to a degree, that's we'll never fully get out of that game, so to speak.
Right.
But we need to recognize it, that if I give myself over to or even largely unaware, live within this dynamic where I'm trying to perfect and prove and climb and measure, then I am I'm taking part in the commodification of these relationships, where there's something that I use for my own sake, and I'm not necessarily trying to love my kids for my kids' sake, or love my neighbor for my neighbor's sake. I am deep within. You peel back the layers of the onion. I'm loving them for my sake.
Yeah.
And I'm serving them for for my own ends. They are a mean to my ends. And who wants to do that?
Right.
Right? Who wants to do that? Now, again, to a degree, it's unavoidable because we're so profoundly imperfect, right? But I think there is it's good to know that we're engaging in that, so we can step away from that a little bit, or at least recognize it and go, that's not what I want to be about. And then we can pivot back to the good news of I'm already right and good and perfect in God's eyes, and go, okay, all right, I've been like measuring my fatherhood, measuring my motherhood, and trying to make myself feel okay by that. And I don't have to do that. Thank you, Lord. I don't actually have to do that. Okay?
Right.
Like I am good in the eyes of the one that matters most, even though I have failed as a father today. I am good in the eyes of the one who matters most, even though I failed as a father today. That's okay. I'm reoriented. Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Right? That's the journey we want people to take.
For sure. Yeah. And I think it changes too, because when people are commodifications for your own ends, you have to almost like shape and form them into that. And when they're not being that because they are people themselves or they mess up, it can be obviously very frustrating and totally cuts off that chance for true Christian love and love from the Father to flow through. Because they're not only something you're using, but they're a transaction that's happening. You need something back from them.
That's right. It's a hard truth. Sorry to interrupt, but it's a really hard notion to escape, that especially like my kids or my spouse or my friends are not an extension of my own worth and well-being. And they don't exist to serve my story. Right. They're a part of it, but they do not exist to serve my identity. And my standing, certainly with God. Or my own sense of worth and well-being at all. Like we're constantly fighting that. Like the subtext of so much of this, like especially like as a parent or a spouse or a professional, right? Is as everything that happens that other people do, we go, well, what does it say about me? Right. What does it say about me? What does it say about me? What does it say about me? And that's you can kind of draw a line from that all the way back into your junk drawer to we're using everything to measure who we are and how we're doing. And the message of the gospel is that's not how it works. Right. That's not how it works, at the very least, with God. Right. And then there's an invitation to go, well, what if we didn't work that way in other relationships either? We'll never get there perfectly. Right. But it does invite us to consider the alternative. Well, and it frees us even when we are doing that to know, oh, this is not the way it works. That's right. Like this isn't it. This whole conversation kind of flows into, I think it's actually the third chapter on vocation, right? And work itself. Can you tell us a little bit about why you included that chapter and what exactly we need to kind of pull out and re-examine from the junk drawer when it comes to our jobs and our vocations? So the item in the junk drawer for the chapter entitled The Why of Work is an ID badge. If you work in corporate America at all, that little badge they make you wear so that everyone knows exactly who you are, because you're just a cog in the wheel otherwise. And they also use it to like track when you've left for lunch break and all that kind of stuff that all of us had, or we had. Maybe it's a school ID badge, right? It identifies us in this place of working, right? And we tend to hold on to them for too long. So it's in the junk drawer. And it represents the fact that we are not only people with vocations, with various jobs, but that we often see our jobs as functional saviors. That we see the work that we do as a way to prove ourselves and you could say save ourselves. So we're all fighting to be right and to be good. And we see our productivity in the professional realm as a primary means to prove our goodness and our rightness. And the idea in that particular chapter is that desks make terrible deities. Is that because when you believe this idea that, well, I can make myself feel right with myself and right with God, however I define that, by just crushing it at work. When you give into that idea at all, what you discover is that you never arrive. you never arrive. You're only as good as the last deliverable.
Yeah.
You're only as good as the last sale you closed. You're only as good as that. And then when it's done, you have to do it again.
Yeah.
Or else you don't have any of that value anymore.
Right.
And when that idea is soul crushing.
Yeah.
And I wrote that chapter really wrestling with that from a professional standpoint with myself as like a pastor. Like I struggle with that as a pastor. I'm a really performance-oriented person. I have a lot of goals and objectives, and I really want to be, I want to be successful in life. And I don't think that's bad. I think it's about being faithful with one life that I've been given, right? But I have to really, really, really fight the notion that I am what I do professionally. My early part of my ministry, like the first 10 years, it was killing my soul. Because, I would work so hard to preach like the best sermon, right? And I'll be honest, they were pretty good. I think like the first 10 years they were my best sermons. They were so good, but it came at such a cost. And if I didn't get enough people saying to me at the end of a Sunday service, boy, that was not just that was good, but that was wow, that was unbelievable. Or I would make I would like dance around with my wife, be like, so what'd you think of the sermon today? And if she didn't say, you know what, Matt, it was amazing, I would be mopey, right? And I needed so much of myself to be affirmed and celebrated professionally, and if it didn't happen, I was in despair.
Yeah, and the stakes seemed like
were always getting higher.
Yeah,
always getting higher.
Yeah.
And then what would happen is like Monday morning would come, and I would sit there and go, and I have to do all of that over again. Otherwise, you're always back at the bottom of the mountain.
Yeah.
You're always you're always back on the treadmill, and the incline is 0, and you got to go work your way all the way back up.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just so hard. It's soul killing. And so in that chapter, we talk about how jobs make terrible functional saviors because they always demand, they never give.
Yeah.
And you'll never get what you want out of it. And we talk about, why is it that we so often attach so much spiritual meaning to the work that we do. And again, we reorient ourselves to the truth of the Christian gospel, which is that it is not about what we do, but what has been done. I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's so easy to overlook. It's not about what we do, it's about what has been done. And there is freedom for us to be faithful in our work, but to just also let it be work.
Yeah. Can I ask you, since you brought up that this was kind of a personal chapter, like what changed for you? How did stuff
What changed for me was I darn near had a burnout in 2011, and I had to go to like leader rehab for like a week. Like no joke. Like I went and met with a professional therapist who's also a person of faith.
Yeah.
And sat with them and a bunch of other people for a week, really wrestled with why I was struggling so much. And again, it sounds so simple, but I had a therapist, a Christian therapist, look at me and just say, Matt, work can't do for you what you want it to do. And I had never thought of that. He just said, work can't do for you what you want it to do. And then he said, and it was with a group of other people who'd gotten to know me over the course of that week. He said, and we don't need you to be good at it. And to have people who'd gotten to know me look at me and go, even if you are terrible as a pastor, we still like you. We've gotten to know you, and we like you, and we love you. We don't need you to be amazing at that. That was life-changing to me. To know that there were people out there who just needed me to be me.
Yeah.
And it sounds so cheesy and so simple. They needed nothing from me other than for me to show up.
Yeah.
They didn't need me to be a great preacher. They needed me to be a great pastor. They just needed me to be me. And I found that I needed more people in my life who just needed me, who didn't need me to be anything other than just Matt Popovits.
Yeah.
That changed it for me. But that's also like that's a glimmer of the gospel, right?
For sure.
And that's the most life-changing truth in the world, like or experience in the world, when someone can see you, like really see you, and look at you and go, yeah, I see that, and I still love you.
Yeah.
What's for lunch?
Yeah.
Like that changes your life. And in Christ, that's what we get from God.
Right.
That's what we get from God.
I think
he sees us, like the whole us, and he goes, "Oh, I see it. Yeah. And I've dealt with that.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I'm not pushing away from the table.
Right.
And I'm still here.
Yeah.
And I don't need you to be anything other than an empty and broken vessel. I don't need you to be anything other than that. And what's for lunch?
Yeah.
You know?
That's amazing. I mean, I read this book early this year called You Are Not Enough. I'm going to forget the author's name, but I'll try to link it in the show notes. But she's unpacking kind of performance culture in America, specifically as it relates to high schoolers and kids. And really the thread throughout is what combats that is what she calls mattering. I think there's like actually a lot of books on the psychology of mattering, what that means, which was amazing. And like you said, that even that in and of itself, like when a parent can look at a child and make sure that they're communicating they matter more than just their grade on the test or what college they get into, that's so life-changing. But I couldn't help but think throughout the whole book, I don't think this woman is a Christian, or she's at least not writing from a Christian perspective, that we really have the corner on that as Christians. I mean, because you can say you matter until you're blue in the face, and I think it does have an impact, and it's very helpful for anybody. But at some point, I think some people are going to be like, but why? Why do I matter?
Right.
What makes all of these fears and all of these mistakes and all of my trespasses go away? Like what takes that away in actuality? And so I think Christians have the answer to that, obviously.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. You not only need a God who sees it, you need a God who deals with it. Right. And then still having seen you and paid for you, right? Loves you and needs nothing from you.
Yeah.
It takes those three things: seeing, forgiving, and receiving. Like receiving you, accepting, right?
Yeah.
So seeing, forgiving, and accepting. All those three things come together and you go, oh, this is the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah.
You haven't just swept away the reality of who I am. You have dealt with it. And you don't hold it against me that you had to pay such a high price to deal with my garbage. So you see it, you pay for it, you don't hold it against me. You just look at me in love and go, oh, I'm so glad that's out of the way.
Yeah.
Amazing. I just love you.
I don't want to, spill the beans on every single chapter of the book. We've talked about a few at this point. Are there any others that you felt really convicted to write about, or you see? I mean, I think you've been writing this over the process of a few years since you kind of started, that you're like, man, this has really been something that I've seen pop up for people that I'm excited to give them good news about.
Yeah. I think, of course, the book as a whole, I'm just really excited to share with people. But I think that the second to last chapter, we talk about the shallowness of happiness. Yeah. And, in that chapter, I go after what I think is a precious notion to many people, which is the idea that God wants me to be happy.
Yeah.
And instead, what we talk about is maybe God is after something deeper for us. Maybe what God is after for us is holiness. Now I don't put holiness out there as like a religious pursuit of like perfection.
Yeah.
But resting in a holiness that comes to me from God, and rather than which as I sit with the holiness of Christ given to me, produces something better than happiness, which is joy and peace, right? And so we wrestle with the notion of, does God want me to be happy, or does He have something deeper in store for me? And so we talk about that, and that I like that chapter because it's a precious idea to many people. Well, God wants me to be happy. We use it to justify a lot of things.
Yeah.
Right. And we use it also as a reason to get mad at God a lot. I'm not happy, and so I'm mad at God. But what if God's after deeper things?
Yeah.
And so I come at it from an angle of parenting, so I really appreciate that chapter. It was a hard one to write because it's a sticky subject for people. We talk a little bit in that chapter about, well, if God wants us to be happy, then why do bad things happen?
Yeah, there's a conversation about suffering in there for sure.
For sure, yeah. And so we talk about, well, why does suffering happen, right? There must be a redemptive purpose to it. Like we can't ultimately know what God's up to all the time and things we don't want to try and get inside of his head, but if God exists for my happiness, then there's no place for suffering, and God has really broken a promise to me. But if God is after my holiness, where I'm resting in who Jesus is, and enjoying that, then there is a place for suffering, because in my struggle, I can see my weakness, and I can understand my need for Christ's work and his perfection, and I can see that more deeply. Right. And so we talk about some deep things in that chapter. So I appreciate that chapter. I also get to talk about my kids in that chapter, which is why I enjoy it.
Yeah, that's great. You kind of end with, which is obviously important, you end with some ways or some helpful things you think people need to keep as they are curating or maybe putting things back in the drawer after cleaning it out. I don't know if that's an apt analogy, but can you talk a little bit about those things that you really think people need to hold on to as they are maybe going through this process? I think you mentioned like repentance is one of them.
Well, I think so all of them are, the things I mentioned are really just means or practices that bring us right back to the finished work of Jesus.
Yeah. Okay.
So in the end, what we are invited into is this life where we're constantly turning back toward who Christ is, what Christ has done, away from who I am and what I need to do.
Yeah.
And so whatever we can invite into our life that helps us with that dynamic. So Martin Luther, when he wrote the 95 Theses, the first of the 95 was God wills that the entire life of a Christian would be a life of repentance. And what he's not saying is that it should be an entire life of feeling bad about who you are.
Yeah.
But what is repentance other than falling at the feet of Jesus on the cross, falling at the foot of Christ on the cross?
Yeah.
Right. That's all it is. So this continued curation is about saying, well, what can I have in my life that allows me to just perpetually fall at the feet of Jesus and say, thank you for being enough. And it is finished in you, and I am free in you. So things like, being a part of a church community where there is a rhythm of confession and absolution, where that I can then also incorporate in my own life, where I am familiar with the dynamic of me bearing my soul to God and just being like, I'm a mess like this. I'm empty because of this. I'm messed up at this. Just bearing your soul, being seen, and then hearing and being given the gift of forgiveness over and over and over again, so that's getting the last word in the rhythm of your life. Yeah. Right. It's also about being a part of a community where people try to remind you of that truth, right. and who don't need you to be anything other than a messed up sinner in need of grace, right? But it's all about just getting back to and making space in your life for the message of Christ crucified for you, and that's enough. Yeah, that's enough. As we gather all this other stuff, just by the grace of God, let that be at the center of our drawer. Yeah. Christ crucified for you. And that's enough.
Go to places where you hear that and you're reminded of that.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that we're kind of closing out. Is there anything that you want people to know about the book before we end that we haven't covered?
Well, I think, the goal of the book is for it to be accessible, yes, understandable, and so it's if you're concerned about it being a thick academic, theological treatise on Christology, it is not. It is not. That. I am not the person for that. I grew up in a family where we bought the cereal that was on the bottom shelf and in the bag, not the box, right? And I think there's no shame in that, because everybody's got to eat. Yeah. And so I try to teach and write for people who need theology in a bag and not a box on the bottom shelf, because everybody's got to eat. And so all that to say, I try to write this book in a really accessible, understandable, relatable way. And so if that's where you are, if you're not a theological academic, if you're someone who's like, I want to think about these things, wrestle with these things, be reminded of these things. I'm doing a bit of deconstruction curation, man. I just want to get back to the fundamentals, the basics, and understand what must be, what's got to be, but is the center of my drawer, man. Then this book is for you, or it's for your friend.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's amazing about it is that it is so accessible, and it is at the same time stripping away stuff that we don't need and giving people the fundamentals. Yeah. And I think that you did an amazing job doing both of those things at the same time. So I'm really grateful for it and excited for people to read it. So thanks for coming to talk to us about it.
It was my pleasure.
It's out. Tell us the date and also where people can find more about you and your work and follow along with what you're doing.
Yeah, so the book is available October 15th.
Okay.
And you can get it at Amazon, or you can get it through the fantastic publishers, 1517.org/shop. You can grab it there. And I think it's going to be available in a couple other places as well. Just Google it, Junk Drawer Jesus.
Great.
So if you want to learn more about my ministry, so I'm the pastor of St. Mark Houston. You can go to stmarkhouston.org, or some of the work that I do outside of the church, alongside of the church, you can go to makeitsimple.org.
Okay.
And there you'll find a podcast that we do, a daily radio show that we do, another book that I've written about making tough decisions, and also I do a good deal of communications coaching for professional speakers, non-professional speakers, pastors, and so if you need some help with that, I'd be happy to chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Hey, thank you.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast and show. To learn more about all of our podcasts and all of our shows, go to 1517.org/podcast. If you liked this interview and you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, I would encourage you to check out this episode and all of the other episodes over on YouTube. You'll find the link to our show in the show notes below, but you can also just search Kelsi Climbera and Outside Ourselves will pop up. And of course, if you haven't done so already and you like what you are hearing on Outside Ourselves, I'd love if you could give the show a 5-star review wherever you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any other podcast platform. Thanks as always for listening. I'll see you back here in a couple weeks with our next guest.